You know that feeling of, I've been here before?
In our second look at this British science fiction classic of the mid-70s, we're taking a closer look at the 24 episodes of the first season.
To what extent?
We'll soon find out.
Send up the flares, because in this video, we're sending up all the flares. It's year one of Space 1999.
Leave me with my pain. It reminds me I'm human.
In part one of our look at Space 1999, we looked at the series' origins, how it was made, its characters, its stories, and the rather major ways the two seasons differed from each other. Today, we're going to look at the first season of Space 1999, known as Year 1. 24 episodes screened from fall or autumn of 1975. Space 1999 was made in a way that, aside from the first episode of each season, you could more or less watch episodes in any order. We'll be looking at this in more or less production order.
John is conscious again, but computer says he's as pig-headed as ever.
Oh.
Space 1999 would be a show that has its die-hard fans, though thinking about it, how cool would it have been if there was a Space 1999 episode where a barefoot John Koenig has to take out a bunch of terrorists who took over Moonbase Alpha? But anyway, Space 1999 fans really took to the eagle, so much so that there's a documentary about one fan's obsession with the design. The animated series Archer would borrow the show's title for a sci-fi themed season of the show, and in the 90s Red Dwarf would riff on one of Space 1999's most memorable monsters. And in a personal tribute to the show, I always wear beige flares to funerals.
Go ahead, Captain.
Year 1 begins with Breakaway, where a new commander for Moonbase Alpha arrives. After an earlier tour of duty, John Koenig returns to Alpha to take over just as an accident causes a massive explosion which will fling the moon out of Earth's orbit. There's no chance they can get back to Earth, but perhaps they can find a new home on, planet Meta. Not a Facebook planet, but the point of origin of a signal that may be life.
As we know it.
A manned mission to Meta and its setbacks had been the reason Koenig was appointed to the moon. But after the moon becomes an enormous happy wanderer, maybe the surviving Alphans can settle on Meta. And then Meta will never be mentioned again. Breakaway, though, is a great setup for the series. Some or all of its science may smell fishier than dumpsters at a fish finger factory during a heatwave.
It's inconsistent.
We get a sense that there's some serious side effects on Earth, but Alpha is more or less on their own. Commissioner Simmons turns up just in time to be stuck on Alpha, but he will return in time.
So just remember that.
Roy Dotrice would appear in lots of series in both British and American productions, but may be best known for the series Beauty and the Beast. British character actor Philip Maddock originally had a larger role as recalled Commander Gorski, but that was cut for time. The moon not being where you left it would have serious, if not outright disastrous consequences on Earth. But of course, Space 1999 was designed to be a show where there was no possibility of setting an episode on Earth. Would life on Earth have been that bad for the survivors? I mean, there would have been the massive tidal waves, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. But just think about it, without a moon, there would be a massive drop-off in werewolf attacks.
Now we're sitting on the biggest bomb man's ever made.
Series creators Gerry and Sylvia Anderson had originally written a half-hour script, which was later taken on by American writer George Bellac, and then rewritten by others until there were more cooks in this kitchen than a crossover episode of MasterChef and Great British Bake Off. As Breakaway was the first episode, it was given a much longer schedule than was usual for a single show. Even so, the episode's director, American Lee Katzin, ended up shooting so much material that the first cut ended up being closer to 2 hours. Gerry Anderson said he created new scenes to make the story work in a 50-minute slot, helming several days of reshoots shot in between other episodes.
If that's what you need.
That's what I need.
In total, Breakaway would take close to 4 weeks worth of shooting days, making it a very expensive piece of television. Lon Satton's character, Benjamin Uma, would be recast in the series to follow, replaced by the character David Carno. The final product is generally well made, though it's very on brand. There are only a few brief character introductions, only Dr. Russell and John Koenig are allowed any character development, but this is an episode that focuses mainly on the plot. It has one major aim: to work up to the moon being blasted out of Earth's orbit, or two if you include providing Martin Landau with opportunities to put on his thinking face. Later on, when the episode was recut with another episode to become a feature film, Alien Attack, some additional footage was shot, apparently starring the Wiggles at a meeting of Earth's Turtleneck Commission.
As you know, our moon has been blasted out of orbit.
in Matter of Life and Death, we encounter the first of several potential homes for Alphans in the form of the planet Terra Nova. I mean, with a name like that, that's kind of preloading things a bit before they've even investigated. An eagle is nearly lost and recovered, but they found a stowaway, Helena Russell's apparently dead husband. Lee Russell was thought lost on a doomed space mission, the first of so many doomed space missions we'll come across. He's not all that talkative, but only perks up when the idea of the Alphans settling on the planet is raised. According to Victor, Lee is dead some of the time, and then alive, but only when Helena is around. Which does sound like what happens when you go to dinner with your in-laws and your partner visits the bathroom. Lee apparently dies, so that's the end of that.
I'm just numb.
A mission to the planet seems to be going okay, until everybody there starts dying or going blind or blowing up, leaving only Helena. Lee Russell shows up to let Helena know that she has a choice as to what happens next. And then everything is reset, the moon's back and the crew are alive and well.
We cannot stay here, John.
Just so long as they don't try to colonize this planet. So that's a planet with some lofty visa entry requirements and some very unfriendly customs officials.
Transformed us, scattered us into deep space.
So what was all that about? No idea. Other than, space is weird. We don't understand everything that we encounter and anything can happen. Which, funnily enough, is the same reaction I had when I learned that the American sitcom Wings ran for 8 seasons.
Professor, you didn't answer my question. Do you think we can avoid it?
In Black Sun, there's something big in space sucking in everything around it, and it's not Martin Landau posing for the camera. The Black Sun will engulf Alpha, and there's very little the Alphans can do. Victor Bergman has designed a force field built by cannibalizing most of the Eagles, but it's more for crew morale than it is of any practical use in stopping the Black Sun from crushing the moon into a pebble. Nothing is going to stop the power of a Black Sun. One Eagle is left and outfitted as a survival vehicle for a number of Alphans.
I can't speak for the rest, but I care about dying.
The idea of that doesn't go down too well with people like Alan until he ends up selected as the pilot of that Eagle. Everyone else resigns themselves to their fate by playing cards or chess. And of course, it's bloody Paul Morrow who brought a guitar. Victor and John sit about and have a conversation about the meaning of this and that and the other. They share a bottle of brandy and Victor has a cigar. And then they become intensely old and have a conversation with some cosmic entity telling them that everything's going to be okay and then they will survive. This is another episode where the climax is to do nothing and everything will be dandy. The episode is nicely directed with the usual note of featuring mainly outstanding effects. It is lacking in major action scenes, but this ends up being a story focusing on Alphans dealing with a situation they believe is terminal. The acting here is some of the series' finest, with Martin Landau and in particular Barry Morse giving outstanding performances. Their chat as they share a glass of brandy is either a wonderful moment of two characters preparing for the inevitable, or
boring, get back to the spaceships and fistfights.
Me, I think it's one of the best moments in the entire series.
We got through.
It's not a fast-moving episode, and that's possibly at the expense of retaining younger viewers or Americans. Despite the dark and funereal overtones, there's no suggestion of an even darker draft where people went a little nuts, like having Commander Koenig revealed to have been a serial killer all along, and here he wears Victor's face as a mask, where he dramatically rips it off at the end of Act 3. Black Sun is an episode that's well regarded by fans and the cast, most of whom thought that Black Sun was one of the sorts of episodes that the series should do more of. And yes, it's probably a black hole, but calling it a Black Sun at least covers the production for any made-up science in the episode, of which there is a lot. The moon passes through the Black Sun unscathed, and also the survival Eagle manages to make it home. For some reason, the inside of the Black Sun looks suspiciously like somebody raided a dumpster behind a department store in January.
It's all right. I'm just rambling on.
In contrast, Ring Around the Moon is the sort of episode that's a template. If you wanted to make a really not very good episode of this sort of show, then Ring Around the Moon is your baseline. Here's another unexplained alien influence that takes control of first a technician and then Helena. The inhabitants of the planet Triton are worried about an inevitable invasion by people from Earth. Except why? Triton is depicted as a void with no nightlife at all. It does not have easy transport links. Oh, and the locals are ethereal brain eyes, which will make dating somewhat difficult. Now, do I use the word rubbish? Or do I hold that in reserve for an even worse episode? Ring Around the Moon turns out to be an early misfire. Earthbound is unusual in that it has a returning guest star playing the same character. Roy Dotrice reprises his role of Commissioner Simmons from the first episode. He's apparently been there the whole time, but now he's becoming antsy about being a spare part on Alpha. Imagine that. Some aliens show up who are on a pre-programmed generational journey. A trip that will take a very, very long time, so they just sleep it off. At some point in the future, they will stop off at Earth, but they are not, repeat, not a glam rock band on a tour of the Midwest. They seem quite friendly and are open to the Alphans. They offer to take one Alphan with them to Earth, provided they undergo a procedure to create a customized suspended animation process. The lucky Alphan will be selected by the Moonbase computer. Simmons decides, screw that, and pulls a gun on everyone, demanding that he be the one to travel with the aliens. Koenig has no choice but to let him. Of course, there are not one but two twists. Firstly, Simmons was selected by computer anyway, and secondly, since he did not allow himself to be prepared adequately, he's stuck in his glass sleeping chamber wide awake until he dies. Whereas many first season episodes would be about some form of alien or unexplained menace, here is an episode where it's an ordinary human who is the villain. Just an ordinary selfish asshole acting like a complete asshole doing asshole-like things to save their own ass, including the whole. It's a better than average episode, or at least a better than what would be the average for this first year. Christopher Lee is another in a long line of distinguished actors playing an alien with over-the-top makeup and costumes. They'll usually end up speaking in very stilted tones, but Lee manages to inject his Kaldorian with a quiet dignity.
We overestimated your computer's ability to analyze the human spirit.
Also, his band is touring all the usual venues, tickets are on sale soon, and you can buy t-shirts at the door. Also, their latest album's on cassette and 8-track. Another time, another place. Well, the first half of this episode is quite terrible, and then the second half picks up to become watchable. So the watchable and unwatchable parts do cancel each other out. So on balance, you end up with a draw. An Alphan who, for some reason, everyone calls Regina. Actually, I can totally work out why they say it that way, the dirty so-and-sos. Anyway, Regina is adamant that she's married to Alan, but that he and Koenig will die in an Eagle crash. No one believes her, though truth be told, a fatal Eagle accident is not beyond the realms of possibility. Their flight safety record is of course spottier than a Dalmatian with chickenpox.
Regina might be living a past life, or perhaps even a future life.
Then there's some freakiness going on, which ends with Alpha returning to its original Earth orbit. But there's also another moon, with an abandoned Moonbase Alpha and a crashed Eagle that just happens to have a dead Alan and John Koenig inside. On the mostly devastated Earth, they find a small enclave of survivors from the other Moonbase. Helena meets her counterpart, but then it becomes apparent that anybody who meets their counterpart will quickly die. And so the Alphans, that's our Alphans, not these weird Alphans, will not be able to stay behind. The second half of the episode is much better than the first half, with quite a dark concept of an alternative timeline Alpha where things did not go so well. Now, the moon's been blasted out of Earth's orbit. Things have already not gone so well, but this is what happens when it goes even worse. But this is an episode of television, so we end the episode where everything has magically returned to the status quo. The story sort of works after watching the whole thing, but the direction choices early on are incredibly unappealing and off-putting.
Why should this only happen to Regina?
Judy Geeson is the guest artist playing Regina. Anyway, I always thought, outside of the place in Canada and the Latin-derived name for the Queen, that it was Regina. But what would I know? I'm an idiot who says vegetables, Voyager, and vagina.
I know less and less about this universe, Victor.
Missing Link has an Eagle crashing. What were the odds of that? Sandra has been injured while John Koenig is on life support. Meanwhile, he thinks he's on the planet Zeno, with Peter Cushing as an alien scientist playing mind games to make John Koenig want to stay. It's a rather chatty episode, and a little cheap looking in places. The scientist Ran insists Koenig has to decide to stay, where he could marry his space daughter or return to Alpha, but only one version of Koenig would live. Meanwhile, Helena is about to pull the plug on John, and Alan tries to intervene.
You're not going to kill him.
It's almost as if the phrase middling was invented to describe this episode. It's not terrible, but it can drag in places. And it's one of the few examples of the realization of an alien domain that just doesn't work. In the background of this, you can see some of the crew relationships firming up along the way. John and Helena in the background, Paul and Sandra. But when Koenig is presented with a plan B, he doesn't seem to hang about.
I want to know your mind. The mind of an Earthman.
The wig worn by Peter Cushing in this episode was eventually worn by about a half a dozen other guest stars from year one. The wig consequently has some fun stories to tell, which you can read about in its tell-all memoir, The Heir Apparent. I recommend the audiobook version, read by William Shatner. Oh, come on, that's not very nice.
Well, he'll want to come. He'll change his mind.
He's so inflexible.
Guardian of Piri has Alpha pass by an eccentric planet that might look like a beanbag factory has exploded, but it could be habitable, just so long as someone whips around with a vacuum cleaner first. The planet Piri might be suitable for the Alphans, but it's hard to tell as weird things are happening, with first the Alphan computer systems failing, and then the Alphans themselves acting strangely. David Kano had been part of an experiment to link the brain with technology, which is used here to find that, yeah, something's up. The Guardian of Piri exerts an influence on the Alphans, making the majority of the Alphans drink the Kool-Aid. Against Koenig's wishes, they put Operation Exodus into effect, leaving Koenig alone on Alpha, where he quickly becomes desperately lonely, but at no point starts a YouTube channel negatively reviewing movies and television shows that he hasn't seen.
3 days of despair have reduced you to pills to help you sleep the hours away.
On Piri, the Alphans laze around like tranquilized sea lions at a resort catering exclusively to zombies. Koenig does manage to treat Helena, where he breaks her free from the trance. The only way to free the Alphans from their enslaved state is to destroy the Guardian, who of course turns out to be a robot. It's only after everyone's returned to Alpha and the moon's out of range of Piri do they get the computer readings telling them that they could have lived happily on Piri.
They have accepted the dominion of the Guardian.
It's an okay episode, where John Koenig is again the only one to resist the alien influence, but it does have really high production values. It's also a little bit interesting since guest artist Catherine Schell would return to the series as a regular the following year.
Okay.
Force of Life is one of a few horror episodes we'd get in this first season, where some unexplained alien something turns up uninvited and possesses some Alphan who we hadn't previously seen.
There's something out there we don't understand.
Here's a glob of energy taking over technician Anton Zorov,
And you're sure this has never happened before?
No.
who then kills a few people before trying to detonate one of the Moonbase's power complexes. It's a spooky and effective thriller. Short on explanations, high on creepiness, leading up to Ian McShane's character being subsumed by the entity where it causes an explosion, killing whatever was left of Zorov, and the alien thingamajig leaves. Basically a gatecrasher turns up to your house party, kills the lodger, and makes off with your boiler.
We don't know what that alien force was.
We, as the audience, are left in the dark as to what it was. This is a show, or at least a season, where often there are no definitive explanations. Just a suggestion as to what might have occurred, where we'll have some serious pondering on the nature of existence as somebody stares out the window into space with a quizzical expression. I enjoyed this episode, where the premise is a bit more than Lovejoy becoming a possessed killer, but after watching the episode, I did go and stare out the window for a full 10 minutes. Alpha Child begins with the first birth on Moonbase Alpha, young Jackie Crawford, who all of a sudden goes from being an infant to a 5-year-old. Writing this growth spurt off as a simple byproduct of space travel, the Alphans are besotted with Jackie, but slowly it looks like this innocent boy in the too cute kid-sized Moonbase Alpha uniform is silently influencing personnel on Alpha. John Koenig still seems to be somewhat concerned, and he's not 100% under the spell of young Jackie. Some alien ships show up, and suddenly things take a turn. Jackie and Jackie's mum have been vessels for a pair of alien criminals who want to take over the bodies of another 120 Alphans. Alpha Child is more unsettling in places than outright creepy, up until the grown Jackie snogs his mother/not mother. The episode predates the 1976 film The Omen by a good margin, though here Jackie doesn't actually kill anyone. The alien who took over Jackie was played by noted character actor Julian Glover, who would not be too shy about taking the piss out of his wardrobe for this episode, so neither should we. However, I would guess that many younger viewers at home at the time wish that they had a child-sized Moonbase Alpha uniform like Jackie's. I thought I'd save my parents some time and make my own, but Mum was not pleased, and to this day I still don't understand why she says that I ruined 2 perfectly good shirts. No, wait, no, I see it now, I see it. now. This episode also seems to be an early example of blue steel.
Look, you've got to stop calling that Jackie, but rather some alien power amongst us.
Alpha Child is an example of an episode that was going along at a particular pace and then out of nowhere becomes something almost completely different. It goes from being moody and creepy to action-packed in the blink of an eye. As an episode in 2 parts, its first half is a bit better than the second half. This week's random Alphan, Rula Lenska, who despite having a few lines, is not credited on screen at all. Now she's not alone in the series having a few lines of dialogue and not getting an on-screen credit. I mean, what do you think we are, made of letraset?
Oh, he's bright, all right. Too bright.
In Space 1999, the moon will often pass an inhabitable world, but the locals are, how shall we say, not well disposed to setting up souvenir shops to sell maps and tchotchkes to tourists from Moonbase Alpha. In The Last Sunset, oh look, a habitable planet comes close to Alpha, but before Koenig's people can make preparations for colonizing the planet, air canisters appear on the moon and give the moon an atmosphere. All of this is really a smokescreen for an episode about an eagle crashing on the surface of the newly breathable moon. Alan, Paul, Helena and Sandra have to survive until they can be rescued, but this new atmosphere combined with moon dust is making rescue difficult. Sandra was injured in the crash and needs medical attention. They're also running low on food and water. And so Paul takes a punt and eats some moon fungus as a last resort. Of course, the mushrooms are mostly harmless. Apart from turning Paul into a ranting lunatic who thinks he has divine providence to lead the new settlement on the moon, he has some serious delusions of grandeur thanks to the magic mushrooms. But alas, he never starts singing We Are the Champignons. Here's an episode where Moonbase Alpha has windows that open to let in fresh air. The Alphans frolic in the rain. Everybody has thought to pack resort wear. Also, wasn't it lucky that somebody on Moonbase had the foresight to bring badminton gear along? Also, we won't talk about the moon's surface suddenly having normal gravity.
There are thoughts we just can't allow ourselves to think.
Once the crew are recovered, what are the odds that the newly gifted atmosphere on the moon is just going to evaporate? Yep, some more locals did not want the humans to join them. In Voyager's return, an unmanned probe from Earth will soon pass by the moon. It's powered by the Quilla drive, which can travel vast distances, but its engines are so deadly to nearby life that it's basically a mobile war crime. Most of Alpha are all for destroying the probe, but Victor is excited by the potential of all the data the probe has collected. It's a little like trying to retrieve a favourite mixtape from the cassette deck in a burning car in a gas station.
Something went wrong.
200 people were killed because something went wrong. My father was one of them.
Paul's against it since we've suddenly decided to give him 10 seconds of backstory, but Koenig decides to try and recover the probe. The inventor of the Quilla drive, Dr. Ernst Quilla, has been working on Alpha under an assumed name all along. What a stroke of luck. What a coincidence. What is also a coincidence but less a stroke of luck, some aliens have come looking for retribution on whoever created the deadly Quilla drive and are going to destroy Moonbase Alpha. Voyager's return shows how Space 1999 could spend most of an episode being a compelling human drama, but in the end has to remember it's a Gerry Anderson series where spaceships have a need to be blown up at the end of an episode. All of the fantastic build-up we had with Jeremy Kemp's understated character was just shoved aside so we can have those explosions. Collision Course starts with a mission to destroy an asteroid in Alpha's path. Alan is almost lost, again, and then it gets worse. The moon is about to whack into a planet. But John Koenig has been in contact with a being from the planet who says, "Hey guy, chill, take a load off, everything will be cool if you do nothing." No one else other than Alan believes Koenig. I mean, it's a lot to take on faith that your boss, having spoken to some space rando that no one else is aware of, that said space rando is telling them to ignore the idea of certain doom, and that aforementioned space rando isn't as crazy as you now suspect your boss of being. Having at first humoured Koenig and then confined him to medical centre, the rest of the Alphans work on a plan to try and avoid a collision.
Ara, she called. Where is she? And you saw her too.
Koenig and Alan team up to take over main mission. After some nice action scenes, Alpha sails straight through the planet. So then everything's back to normal, despite the insubordination and fistfights and such.
It would be madness to stop it. Is that what you want?
Exactly. That's what I want.
It's a nice example of Space 1999 this season, where it's not afraid to have its characters disagree with each other, even violently so.
Shoot me, if you choose.
It's also a nice example of writers ending an episode by shrugging their shoulders. I should try that the next time I'm in court on burglary charges. Your Honour, I respectfully submit that on the night in question, I don't know.
Well, I suppose it makes some sort of sense.
Now, if you have a voice in your head telling you to do something that others might deem unsound, just remember, you are a real human being and not an episode of Space 1999 Year 1. If you are an episode of Space 1999 Year 1, well, I just hope you're War Games.
I believe the Victor! I believe that!
But after watching the episode, I did go and stare out the window for a full 10 minutes. Alpha passes closely to the frigid world of Ultima Thule, where, surprise surprise, the locals turn out to be from a lost Earth space mission. The former mission commander, Tanner, is not all there, and like all good depictions of mental illness in 70s sci-fi, he starts reciting poetic verse. I don't know if that's just an artistic way of doing it, or some passive-aggressive diss against the then poet laureate for a bad review of the writer's dirty limerick. The humans on Ultima Thule have adapted to the cold conditions, but there's a secret. The Thulean humans cannot die. They've been there for 800 years. In trying to isolate how they're now immortal, Dr. Roland has left a trail of zombified test subjects. The first test subject, Tanner, survived, but with half his marbles. But he's clearly got the idea that it is not wise for them to leave the planet. Koenig is losing the battle of hearts and minds in preventing the Alphans from staying on Ultima Thule. He does agree to let Roland address the crew of Moonbase Alpha in person.
We shall soon be returning with a full complement.
The twist is, for adapted Thuleans, things won't go so well if they try to leave, which is why it's always important to get travel insurance before takeoff. Death Star the Dominion is a solid episode, but then again, Koenig really doesn't have to do all that much for the story to resolve itself.
From solar system to solar system, from galaxy to galaxy, we shall be as gods in the universe.
The ice planet sets had been made cheaply, but were quite effective. But an unfortunate side effect of their construction, the sets gave off toxic formaldehyde fumes that nearly caused the cars to revolt. One use of formaldehyde is as a medical preservative, as in the stuff used to store leftover bits in jars, like this one. Oh shit!
I am Thule's fool.
John Shrapnel's performance as somebody whose sanity would vary from scene to scene possibly blew away any other guest performance on the series. And here he's acting with Brian Blessed, who for once isn't shouting. Blessed would appear again in the series as a different character in Year 2, where, fortunately, he would shout. You see, that's range.
Professor Bergman and David are coming down in Eagle 3. They haven't heard from the commander either.
Alphans find a planet that could potentially be a place to settle. When a Survey Eagle returns to Alpha, they find a dead caveman on board, who turns out to be an Alphan. Well, there's something transpiring here. It appears that this planet might just be a little bit unusual. Alan goes off to try and rescue Sandra, while Victor realizes they found John Koenig after nearly killing him. Once the penny drops that the cavemen are the Alphans themselves, the episode finds some focus as an interesting episode with a premise that doesn't really resolve itself by aliens doing something alien-y. That said, all people have to do to revert is to go through the mist again. Full Circle was a rare Year 1 episode to feature extensive location filming. Okay, so it was in Black Park, which is almost literally outside Pinewood Studios, but that counts.
And I have lived for over 1,000 of your years.
In End of Eternity, the Alphans explore an asteroid and rescue a heavily injured creature. Back on Alpha, the being's recuperative powers are fantastic, and pretty soon healed to the point where you'd never know that Balor was only recently a mangled lump of flesh. One of the Alphans who found Balor had been injured and takes his grounding from flight status pretty badly, where, under Balor's influence, he beats John Koenig close to death with a model aeroplane. Balor uses his powers to heal Koenig, but then it turns out he's not actually a reasonable person. In fact, he's a psychopathic killer who was imprisoned on the asteroid for a very good reason. The thing about trying to get a giant immortal killer to behave is that, what are you going to do if they decide they don't want to? The answer is, space 'em. Future sitcom star Peter Bowles, with his enormous flares and platform shoes, is fairly imposing as Balor. It does, however, make a very nice change to see the Alphans outwit a foe rather than just sit back and let it play out.
It's an attack, John.
War Games. Well, this one is great. I could build up to that, or I could just get it out of the way now. As the moon approaches the new planet, 3 attack ships head towards Alpha and Koenig decides to take preemptive action. destroying the fighters. Well, that doesn't go over well with the aliens, because very quickly Alpha is attacked again, and this time things do not go very well. Pretty soon we start seeing Alphans dying left, right and centre. Not just random extras, but Dr. Matthias and Alan Carter. With Alpha devastated, Koenig and Helena try to plead for mercy with the inhabitants of the planet, but they're not too keen on listening. The aliens allow Helena to join them, but there is a bit of meditation on the nature of humanity. I have actually lost count of how many times Koenig is apparently dead in this episode, then brought back to life, and then dead. But anyway, Helena now has the power to retrieve him. But if she does, there will be consequences. Back on Alpha, faced with the choice of certain death on Alpha, and almost probably, but in all likelihood, certain death on the planet, they chose the latter type of certain death. Victor leaves a message for anybody who might find the husk of Alpha. Its one owner, needs a bit of work, but for anybody needing a Moonbase fixer-upper, it's got potential. Koenig, saved by Helena, does what the aliens thought he would do, causes more trouble before he gets back in his Eagle, and cancels Operation Exodus.
Turn back?
If you're gonna die, you might as well die on Alpha.
We're back to the start of the episode, just before Koenig gave the order to attack the alien vessels. Now he has a change of heart, followed by a warning from the aliens. It was all a dream, that was their only form of defense. War Games is easily the finest episode of Space 1999's first season, and probably of the series in general. It gives most of the cast some acting work to sink their teeth into, and in particular lets Barbara Bain lose it when she's overwhelmed by despair at the situation, and in particular the idea of losing John Koenig. We start the episode by blowing up Alpha for a lark, but because there are still a few episodes this season, everything has to be restored in time for the next show. It's not a 100% easy to follow episode, but it's an incredibly imaginative one. The aliens played by Isla Blair and Anthony Valentine are more of the typical softly spoken and unflappable aliens of the first year, which contrasts strongly with Dr. Russell's grief and John Koenig on a rampage.
I want him back, as he was.
Koenig in this episode is headstrong and really quick to destroy things. Several Gerry Anderson series had an episode where really bad stuff happens and it just turns out it was a dream of some description, where you could basically kill off most of your main characters and then just press the reset button in the dying moments of the episode. But for a change, this doesn't totally feel like viewers were being shortchanged. It's also not the only Space 1999 episode to do this, but it is just a great episode all around. Fantastic action and fantastic acting. The Last Enemy is a decent action episode where Alpha is passing by two planets separated by a sun, and these two planets have been at war with each other for forever. The Bathans we meet are all women in leather catsuits, and since it's the mid-70s, we have to have the obligatory hair wave after their leader, Dione, removes her helmet. Victor is both impressed and a little jealous. The Bathans have parked their massive spacecraft near Alpha, because they want to use the moon as a mobile gun platform from which to attack their enemies, the Deltans, which does put Alpha in the firing line from Deltan missiles. Koenig's solution is probably one of the most satisfying, but also horrifying of the entire first season, where he pretends to defect to the Bathans in a moon buggy.
Goodbye, Dione.
While the action part is mostly well done, it's not an especially deep episode. The thing that always amuses me with this show...
The data on the left-hand planet.
Now that ship comes from the planet on the left and attacks the second planet, the one on the right.
These are some well-trained space explorers here. This was originally written as a cheaper, budget-balancing show with a short shooting schedule. It ended up running way too short and had extra footage shot later in production to expand on it, and also to make John Koenig's solution more dramatic. It's also the only episode of the entire series where the same person, Bob Kellett, was both the writer and the director. It sounds a good way to go, but here the writer can't blame the director for any of the episode's shortcomings, and the director can't blame the lousy script. Either way, it's a relatively slight and shallow episode, but one that's very entertaining.
They've got their war, and we have all of space in which to find a home.
The Trouble's spirit starts with what looks like Alphans using a seance to have a group chat with plants. Dan Mateo, possibly of the San Mateo Mateos, has been conducting experiments with trying to communicate with plants, but has let loose a killer something on Moonbase. The killer wants revenge for whatever killed him. It stalks a number of Alphans, killing them, before everybody realizes the killer is in fact a horribly burned Mateo from the future. Basically, the story is a closed loop. The ending is a foregone conclusion, like all of those huge dental bills after being drafted into the National Hockey League. It's a solid and enjoyably creepy installment. It only makes a limited amount of sense, much like Harrison Ford playing Biggles.
I just can't get it out of my mind.
Guest star Giancarlo Preta had originally tested for the role that would eventually become Alan Carter, but he wasn't keen at the time to commit to a year of making a television series in the UK. Or, according to Sylvia Anderson, Martin Landau really did not want to be upstaged by a younger actor.
I kill you if you say another word.
In Space Brain, there's an energy field in space that also might be a brain that thinks Alpha is a threat. The Space Brain threatens Alpha by taking over a technician, who of course will be killed, and then for some reason engulfs Alpha in a torrent of foam like an Ibiza ray from the early 2000s. What, you don't believe me? It's not a terrible episode, but it's really enlivened by seeing the Alphans swamped by industrial foam-making machines that have attained sentience. Either that or somebody's just put too much soap in the washing machine. I've accidentally done that on multiple occasions, but I didn't have the wherewithal to film the results. I now wish I had. Also, I still can't find my white Crocs. This is one of a number of episodes that had extra scenes filmed later on, when Gerry Anderson saw the plot wasn't working. The reshoots for this episode would constitute the very last footage shot for year one.
You must not touch my brain!
Shane Rimmer had played dozens of small roles where a British production needed an authentic North American accent, and he'd already worked for the Andersons several times before. The intelligence of his character, Kelly, has been augmented by contact with the Space Brain, where the brain is trying to actually help the Alphans avoid destruction. Kelly's superintelligence would manifest itself in other ways, such as here, where he has to split a restaurant bill for a party of 11 and work out the tip.
At least let Dr. Russell go. And deprive you of your companion.
The Infernal Machine has an eccentric alien vessel approaching the moon. On board is the aging companion, while the ship's computer that he designed is an intelligence known as Gwent. Gwent request demands threatens supplies from Alpha, and by request demands threatens, it's a request that's really a demand backed by a threat.
What's wrong with him?
He's dying.
Companion must not die.
What follows is a tug of war as Koenig, Victor and Helena try to outwit Gwent, who was basically what happened when Companion tried to live forever by making a computerized version of himself. The episode suddenly finds Paul out of action and a new character, Winters, popping up to take his place for this one episode and was never to be heard from again. I did hear that he later started a painting company before settling in the village of Dibley. Prentis Hancock was off for some minor surgery after a lump was found on his neck, hence the one-off replacement character. It's a solid showcase for many of the regulars, with a battle sequence added that, while impressive, doesn't really contribute all that much to the overall episode, other than as something to break up all the talking. Leo McKern is both the voice of Gwent and Companion, and my, aren't we attracting top-flight talent in this show. Their guest cast in this first year really adds an extra layer of texture to the proceedings. Mission of the Darians has the Alphans exploring what they think is a derelict spacecraft. An accident has caused the survivors to evolve in troubling ways. The Darians are few in number, the protectors of the genetic info to repopulate their species, but also on the ship are the Primitives, who have evolved since the original accident. The Alphans are split up, with some dealing with the violence of the Primitives, while others are trying to work out how they can help the Darians. The sting is the Darians have been surviving by, feasting on nutritional elements derived from the Primitives.
Living human bodies.
The Primitives had been worshipping the Darian leader as a god, but you know, it's always disappointing when you meet your idols.
You are not a god.
The overall solution involves getting the Primitives and the Darians to just forget about that whole institutionalized cannibalism thing and widen their dating pool. The impressive production design makes this feel especially grand, though it's a fairly simple story. And of course, it has Joan Collins, who by now is in her 1970s phase of randomly appearing in various science fiction and adventure series in both Europe and the US.
We Darians have had to prolong life by artificial means.
Dragon's Domain was an episode that apparently gave some younger viewers a bit of a scare at the time, so if this was you, here are some soothing images of Martin Landau to reassure you.
Isn't it conceivable there are life forms our instruments can't detect?
This is an episode where a large proportion of it is told in flashback, and at times comes a little bit close to unravelling the show's established continuity, but just manages to hang on, like a scaffolder who suddenly realised they actually need a new apprentice.
Take him to intensive care.
Tony Cellini has a past where he was the only survivor of a mission that left Moonbase Alpha in the mid-90s, where he was friends with a pre-commander John Koenig on an earlier assignment to Alpha, where some of the crew wore colourful jackets. Cellini's original deep space probe had encountered a ship's graveyard, where a tentacled creature nom-nom-nommed the rest of the crew, leaving only Cellini. At the time, nobody believed his story.
Tentacles, bloodsuckers, fire breath. The whole slimy, fantastic story is true.
Later on, he started having dreams about the creature returning. Cellini faces his fears and goes against orders by stealing an eagle to return to the ship's graveyard, where his earlier crew was all but killed by a monster. Dragon's Domain is the sort of monster story where nothing at all is explained, what the monster was or why it just stands in a doorway and then spits out bodies. In small roles are Barbara Kellerman and Michael Sheard, for if I don't mention a particular kids show that starred Michael Sheard for a time, then I will never hear the end of it. But for reasons of bloody-mindedness, I choose not to at this time.
If we think we know everything that goes on out there, we're making a terrible mistake.
Testament of Arkadia is another episode told in flashback, with a narration by John Koenig, where he keeps foreshadowing something extraordinary that will happen at the end. But in the grand scheme of extraordinary things happening to the crew of Moonbase Alpha, it's not all that extraordinary. In fact, it's rather routine. The moon slows down as it nears a planet, and Moonbase Alpha is losing power. A planetary expedition finds a cave with human remains and some writings in a language that is eerily like an early version of Sanskrit. These aliens may have come to Earth thousands of years ago. Two of the expedition have some realization, accompanied by some fancy 70s music, which leads them to go to any lengths to stay on the planet. Then Moonbase Alpha starts accelerating away again, leaving the two Alphans to restart life on the planet. So we're back to the unexplained alien influence on Alphans. Lisa Harrow and another Italian guest, also Maria Guarini,
Stores and supplies to last us 3 years.
Who, for some, well, not entirely unfathomable reason, had half of his dialogue dubbed by another actor.
So barren and solitary.
This was the last episode of the first season in production, and it's basically a greatest hits of all the series' famous storytelling cliches, but it's done relatively well.
The first link in the chain of events that would forge themselves into the inevitable shattering conclusion.
One thing that does make the episode more amusing, John Koenig's narration, where he hypes up the mystery and the shattering conclusion to the episode, only for it just to be two people staying behind on a planet. I tell you what, if this moon-based commander gig doesn't work out for him, Koenig has a future in writing copy for insurance companies. But after watching the episode, I did go and stare out the window for a full 10 minutes.
What's that all about?
That was season 1, where it was wonderful, infuriating, slow-paced, action-packed. At times it answered nothing, and rarely delved much into the backgrounds or personality of its main characters. We only really learned a little about the histories of Helena or Koenig, and almost nothing of Victor, Paul, Sandra, Alan, Kano or Matthias. But it's a series full of invention, full of ambition that some of the time the production pulled off. Unfortunately, that poetic way of just letting things happen, and the often serious mood, didn't quite connect with audiences, which would lead to a new producer trying to fix the series. So after watching the 24 episodes of Year 1, I went and stared out a window for a full 10 minutes. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.